Greetings, dear ladies. I'm KRYON of Magnetic Service. Yet again, we come before you with that which is the essence of Lemuria. We've spoken before about that which is what we now call women's business. And you're beginning to see a pattern. The pattern is this, that women's business is intuitive. That is to say, that the spiritualness that was brought in Lemuria was also brought in other places of the earth at the same time. It was simply common sense that the women would always be the spiritual backbone. This is the Lemurian Sisterhood. All of the ceremonies that were developed, that we have discussed, have to do with this backbone of spirituality. We've also discussed that the culture supported it. It was simply common sense. It's different than today. The idea that you would come together this way and celebrate this which was this powerful backbone of society, this idea is so that today that you might actually bring back the essence of that and understand not only who you were, but who you are. We've given you some history of Lemuria before, and some of you are starting to paint a broader picture accurately. It lasted a long time. We also told you that unlike today, you only got one lifetime in Lemuria. It was the Akashic launching pad of the planet. Because Lemuria was not visited again in another lifetime, you moved on, and you had then the only past life you could remember, which was that of the wisdom of Lemuria. And you did many times on the planet, but only one time in Lemuria. Now for all of you, it was the first time. But it was over a long period, a long history of the earth. Here's what I'd like you to know. The sisterhood actually remained unchanged. This is the way of it, especially with the ancients. When you get something that is working in society, it remains this way. And so the sisterhood, no matter what the lineage of time it had, was always the same. It has etched itself in your Akash to an extent that many of you are remembering you were there. Now, we have said before that the odds that you would be a woman this time would seem by chance not to necessarily be greater than 50%. And yet all of you were. This is on purpose. This was targeted for the precession of the equinoxes, so that you would be a woman at this time, so you would start to remember certain things in your Akash that were powerful. Not the things that would detract from your life at all, but were powerful. And this is one of them. There is a return. In a new consciousness on this planet, there is a return to the respect and the honor of women's business. You're going to start to see some of what we would call the organized spiritual systems on this planet acknowledge this to a point they never have before. And women will be let into that which you have called an old boys club of spirituality, that which leads the churches today. And in order to make this accurate and true and actually cognize it to the planet, there has got to be groups of women who remember their power. Actually, your remembrance of who you were and what you do goes into the crystalline grid of the planet and makes a difference. The crystalline grid is everywhere, along with the magnetic grid. it actually puts into that grid that remembrance of your power, your appropriateness, and what you did. This then spreads into the consciousness of the planet. Therefore, what you do today is not just for you. It passes forward. It plays a part in what may happen. More and more women are awakening to the fact that their past made a big difference on the planet. Not all of you are together in Lemuria. Dear ones, I want you to cancel the minutiae of who was with whom and when. It's not important. Because the sisterhood was so consistent, you all participated as though you were together today. You remember it. Listen, with humanity, the remembrance of past lives is often metaphoric. And what I mean by that is you are not given the details at this point in time, but you often remember being there. You may be sitting next to somebody and wondering, well, was she there with me? She may feel like a sister. You may look at someone and say, yes, I remember you. Not really. What you remember is the experience, not the face, not necessarily the name. The experience was so profound. Many of you have carried it with you all your lives. You show up now as an old soul in this new time, finally remembering it with something to do about it. That's the purpose of the sisterhood. In your remembrance today, I want you to remember what it was about. It was about women's business, deserving to contact spirit and actually set the example spiritually of all that is. It fell on you. You've heard the expression, women's intuition. You've heard this over and over, and it's an indication that the world recognizes that of the two genders, the women have the first intuitive sense the strongest. Now, if you start connecting the dots, you would realize that your intuition in Lemuria actually gave you the kinds of ceremonies, what to do, how to do it. This is why the men depended on you. They didn't have this. They knew they didn't have this. It fell upon you to have the intuitive thoughts from Spirit, from the creative source, from the Pleiadians, in order to create this spiritual balance, this backbone. Couldn't have happened from the men. They had men's business, which was completely and totally different. They needed you. They're going to need you again. This is where it's headed. That is to say, an acknowledgement of women in spiritual organizations, their power, their intuition, and the clarity of thought. Mothers treat life differently. Mothers will have greater compassion than fathers will. This is the way of being the feminine that you are. And it goes right back to the beginning and why you did what you did. Melly Ha has asked for something. I give it to her. The timeline. Melly Ha, you were there when Lemuria started to sink. We want you to know that because it's in your Akash. It has had an effect in your Akash. When your entire spiritual world starts to crumble, and it was, things change. And you had to resolve some fears. What would happen? How far would it go down? And it did. Over a long period of time, it took for Lemuria to sink, but it didn't sink all the way. Today it is the Hawaiian Islands. There's plenty of land left, but you didn't know that when it was going down. We gave an indication that it went down over several lifetimes. So it was very slow, and there was way more time than you would imagine to escape this sinking island. It didn't explode. It simply sank because the bubble under it, which was the magnum bubble of this hot spot on the planet, was moving on. And it was then releasing. And so it sank very slowly. In the process, we also told you that Meliha was constantly rejuvenated in the temple of rejuvenation on the top of the mountain. That means she lived at least 3 lifetimes. She was there for the sinking process. Distraught, yes, but you stayed. Many left Meliha, but you stayed. There is an affinity with one of the islands today of Hawaii with you. And you can share it if you even know which one it is. It's the one you ended up on. As the mountain sank, and the islands then were the tips of the mountains, the one that you chose to stay on, the one that you stayed and died on, is the one that is your favorite today, that you have the affinity for. Many left. You did not. But what was distraught for you was it was the end of the sisterhood. For the sisterhood had only remained stable as long as the mountain remained stable. And when it started to sink, there were all manner of other things to do. That is, to consider what to do about it. Some left, some searching for other places, not knowing whether it was going to go all the way down or not. Think of this. 3 lifetimes you had Meliha, where it was sinking. And so this has had an effect. One of them you're seeing today, and that is the keenness you have to organize a sisterhood yet again. One that won't sink. To rekindle what you had for a remembrance of the process, not of each other, not of the minutiae of what you did, but the process of the enablement of women's business on earth. And so it is.